This week's report into the New South Wales flood crisis confirmed that the plan to raise the Warragamba Dam wall by 14 metres to turn it into a flood mitigation dam would lower floods and protect thousands of homes in the Hawkesbury-Nepean region west of Sydney. This is an area that suffered 5 floods in the past few years with devastating consequences and, of course, a massive damages and recovery bill. The report found that raising the dam wall is the, quote, single most effective flood mitigation option available. But as is always the case with these major projects, the estimated $2 billion cost remains the issue, with the New South Wales government looking to go halves with the feds.
Well, we have raised that with the Commonwealth Government. We're in the final planning phases of that. We've obviously been in communication with the previous federal government and that the former Prime Minister had spoken favourably about going into a joint funding arrangement in respect of that project. It's a complex one, but it's one that has to be done.
Let's bring in Sarah McMahon, who's a councillor at the Hawkesbury Council. We've spoken to you previously, Sarah, when you were the Liberal candidate in the federal election. Tell us about this. Why would the funding be an issue here? Because you've got to save countless billions in damage and possibly lives saved as well.
You are, Chris. And yes, we've spoken about this so many times, and I will continue to fight for this project to actually be done because our community in the Hawkesbury deserves it. And the flood report that was just released shows that. Nearly $4 billion in government support to communities, plus another $2.7 billion in infrastructure damage. The cost so far for the wall, they're estimating, is $2 billion. It just makes total economic sense to get on with it.
And those figures you talk about of over $7–8 billion in damage, that's just in the last couple of years. And people have been talking about raising this wall for over 20 years. So surely they've just got to crack on and get it done. What is the problem now? Surely Canberra can go halves in this?
I think that they can, but the problem is political, Chris, and it gets down to the fact that we now have a state Liberal government and a Premier who has committed to the project and committed to half the funding, but they can't afford the whole project, and the feds do need to step up. Now, we all know it's political. The feds, being Labor, will not commit to this project because their coalition buddies, the Greens, will not support this project. And when they rely on those votes, it comes down to that.
Well, surely this project is so important and relatively cheap at $2 billion, given the benefits of it, that Dominic Perrottet ought to just go ahead with it regardless. He can put the wood on money for Canberra down the track, but he's spending $300 million on a footy stadium at Penrith, close to that area, hundreds of millions of dollars on other footy stadiums. Surely this has got to be a top priority.
This has to be a top priority because the chances are, with the weather predictions, that we're going to possibly have another flood. And I think that when we know the damages that each flood costs, not just to the infrastructure, but to the mental health of our community, to people being unsure about whether they'll have a home to go back to, we need to just get on with doing it. Now, my fear is that when it comes to the state election next year, if the Liberal Party do not win government and the state Labor Party do win government, all the work that has been done so far by Infrastructure New South Wales to get to this point where we're almost there will all be put on the shelf and it'll be over.
Well, that'd be the tragedy. It's got to happen. I reckon Perrottet ought to get working on it and, you know, I don't know, give up one of his footy stadiums.
I think so too. And I will always advocate for what's best for the Hawkesbury and our community, and that means saving lives. And I need to look people in the eye as I'm walking down the street and say that I'm doing whatever we can to protect their lives and their livelihoods.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it.
No worries.
Sarah McMahon there, who's a Hawkesbury councillor. I just can't believe this project isn't underway. It was first knocked back in the mid-90s. Obviously clearly needed, and the federal and state governments should just give it the money, get it started.